So welcome to our public information, and really we want to hear from you. So we're going to give you some information, but we also want to get comment from you. So there'll be a time at the end where we're going to have for questions and comments. But welcome, Loudon Road Bridge. You all are here because you saw the advertisement, so you know what we're talking about, Loudon Road Bridge over the Merrimack River. Just to run through our agenda really quickly, after the welcome introductions, we'll situate you with the location of the project where we're going to be talking about. We'll go into some history. We will go over where we are to date. We'll talk a little bit about the purpose and the need of the project. We'll talk about the concepts that we've looked at. And we'll get into the budget a little bit in the schedule at the end. We'll talk about next steps. So let's start with introductions. I am Mike Bezanson. I'm the city engineer for the city of Concord. And our transportation engineer in the city is Karen Hill. She's not with us tonight, but she's certainly had a key role over the last few years in the development of getting to the project to where it is today. We also have Tony Punton here tonight. He's with DOT. He's our project manager, keeping us on track because this is a state federal funded project and following all the procedures for that. And then we have our engineering consultant group, and they're with us tonight. We have a full team. Rock Larichelle is here. He'll be doing the bulk of the presentation tonight. We also have Keith Cota, technical advisor here. We have Nick Karen, who is our design lead on the structural side, Debbie Finnegan, design lead on the traffic side, and Kevin Slattery is not here tonight, but he's our environmental lead. So that is the team. So the project location, we already talked about, it's the Loudon Road Bridge, and it's over the Merrimack River. Merrimack River, as you know, divides Concord, so this bridge is very important, critical connection from downtown up to the heights. You all know that. So let's zoom in a little bit closer. This is really the project area. If you can see it highlighted in yellow here, this is what we're talking about from either signalized intersection on either side of the bridge. That's really the project area that we're talking about, from Fort Eddy over to that first intersection with the Kiwanis Riverfront Park and the Everett Arena. So all of the things that we'll be talking about are things that we're working on within this project area, and within this project area only, really. So going over the project, basically, it is a project that is in the city's CIP. We've already had funds that have been appropriated in years past to begin the design, which is why we're here today, because we've had that funding. It's also, this project has a DOT project number because it is a funded project, state and federally funded. It's in the 10-year plan. And we'll get into the funding a little bit later in the presentation, but you can see that there's a significant amount of construction funding that is already in the 10-year plan for the state. Study limits, we went over that, Fort Eddy to Everett Arena. The project design, compatible with multimodal plan. So we have a multimodal plan that involves the Merrimack River Greenway Trail. And the Merrimack River Greenway Trail is being built out. Phase 2 just completed last year through the Gully Hill Fields area. And this project, we're looking to connect over the river on the bridge. So we'll get into that a little bit more, some of the specifics. You'll see that in some of the slides. But overall, the project looking to address operational and safety concerns from a vehicular standpoint, safety concerns from a pedestrian and bicycle standpoint too. So we'll look at all of that. But as I mentioned, connecting the Merrimack River Greenway Trail, and obviously we will be coordinating with the I-93 Bow Concord project. It's right adjacent to our project area. So we'll be coordinating with what's going on there. But this meeting tonight, as we get into questions at the end, we'll be focusing just on the Loudon Road Bridge project. So although there may be folks here in the room that are familiar with and part of the team for the frankly, part of the team for the I-93 Bow Concord project. We're going to focus tonight on the Loudon Road Bridge. So if you could, when we get there, just keep your comments to what we have here in front of us with the Loudon Road Bridge project. So with that, I am going to hand it over to Rock.
Thanks, Mike. First, thank you for being here tonight. I'm grateful that you're taking some time out of your day to come and listen to this presentation, and obviously you're interested and involved in your community and have an interest in that. We're going to throw a lot of information at you tonight, and hopefully we'll get some input back from you on that as we continue to go through the design process on the project and consider that and move forward. It's a great project that we've been involved with for quite some time now. I know the project's been around for a while, and so we're going to walk you through some of the details there and hopefully answer your questions. First, through the project development process that we have to follow. So this is a pretty laid out process that we have to follow associated with the federal funding, the state and federal funding that we're working through, and something called, well, let's go through this. When you look at all of these bullets here, what I just highlighted in red is kind of where we're at now. We've already been through some of the data collection process, and we've analyzed some existing conditions. I'll show you where and when we did that earlier on. And so tonight, we're going to show you what the purpose and need statement is that's been developed for the project and how that applies to this project, what it really means to moving forward with the development of the project. We've also looked at a conceptual range of alternatives. We have some more work to do there after we get some input from folks tonight and as we continue on with the design process. And we're looking to seek input from the public, from you folks all here tonight. Following this meeting tonight, we'll be continuing to look at some of the environmental impacts of the alternatives, how it's going to fit in with the community, how it's going to fit in with the physical properties of the area. And then we're going to move towards a recommended preferred alternative that meets that purpose and need statement that I'll show you in a bit. And ultimately develop a proposed action plan that we can build. This is just kind of a snapshot of the typical development process that we're following. It's called the LPA process, Local Project Administration process that we have to go through. And where are we at in this process right now? We're about right here. So there was an engineering study that was completed back in 2020. I'll show you the timeline for that. But so there's been a little bit of work that's been done back then to get to a point where we're at right now. And so now we're partway through that preliminary engineering phase, and we're going to be getting further into that, moving along through final design and construction. That just gives you a snapshot of where we're at. So what have we done to date? I said we've been working on the project since about 2020, and I'll give you a snapshot of what this is. I'm not going to expect you to read all of this. There's a lot of information here, and I'm sure you can't read that. But just as a snapshot, since 2020, we started an engineering study back in that time frame, and we had made a number of presentations to TPAC and City Council. There's a few of you here tonight that attended those meetings, so hopefully you remember that. And the whole process, the whole purpose of going through that engineering study was to identify what some of the constraints were and some of the possible alternatives to solve some of the problems in that area dealing with the bridge condition, access for pedestrians and cyclists as well as vehicles, and how we could improve some of the safety and mobility issues within the corridor along the bridge. So we'd made a number of presentations to TPAC through 2020. We had a draft engineering study that was submitted in early 2021. And then at the end of 2021, that all culminated to going and making a presentation to the Gassett Committee, Governor's Advisory Council on Intermodal Transportation. And ultimately, what we sought out of all of that was to get additional funding for the project. Originally, the project was funded at the federal level at $9 million, which only accommodated for a small deck rehabilitation type project. And ultimately, with some of the goals that were brought forward by the city for what the project wanted to be to accommodate more multimodal needs, safety improvements. We were successful in getting some additional funding through the state's 10-year plan to the sum of about $25 million ultimately, which is what Mike presented earlier. After that, at the end of 2022, there's a little bit of a lag because at that time the 10-year plan was getting authorized, and Mike was just coming on at that time, and there was some work that he had to do to actually get the project into the program at the city level. And then we were authorized to start our data collection phase in early 2024. So there's a little bit of a lag there as things got into play, the money got into play, the contracts got underway, and we started our data collection phase, what we called phase one. And so we've already been out there collecting a lot of traffic data, a lot of environmental data. You might have seen people out there counting cars and collecting information. And so all of that goes into the decisions that have to be made and how we're going to move forward with the design, how we're going to move forward with finding a project that fits within this community. So that's phase one. And then in January of 2025, so not so long ago, we were finally contracted, authorized to move forward with the design phase of the project. We collected data, now we're moving forward with that information and moving forward with the design phase of the project. And that takes us to tonight, March 20, 2025, and from there, we'll continue to move. And I'll look at a schedule a little bit later and show you where we're going to end up. So the study area for the project, as defined, is here. What's highlighted in here. So we're looking at, we've collected traffic information all through this project area in this corridor, all the way up Fort Eddy Road, Loudon Road, and so we've collected additional information, updated traffic information from what was originally studied in 2020, because some of that information was dated. So the whole point of getting updated information in 2024 was to look at how the corridor is operating now post-COVID, and refining the design to make sure that it worked with what we're trying to do now with safety improvements and modifications. You're not going to be able to read this, but this kind of shows you the traffic volumes that were collected in 2024 and what the network looks like after you get all of that data collection done and put it on a plan. So this area here is really the project area that we're concerned about. This is the ramps and Fort Eddy Road, and this is Gully Hill Road here. And we also collected traffic information as well as pedestrian information and bicycle information. And that all goes into the study that we're evaluating moving forward. Interestingly enough, back when we did the original study in 2020, there was traffic collision data that was collected from 2015 to 2020. And one of the things I want to point out here is this intersection here at Fort Eddy Road had a total of 77 crashes over that period of time, which is very high. Resulted in a very high crash rate here at 1.26. So really, as you approach 1 and go over 1, that's one of the things that we look for is an identification that there's needs there. As far as data collection, one of the things that we also have to do is go through the environmental process, identify resources, figure out how that's going to be impacted by the project, document that, and that becomes part of the permits and approvals that we are ultimately going to have to seek. So the environmental process involved early constraints identification. So we've collected all of this information from wetlands to invasive species, wildlife and fish habitat. Some of this stuff is still going on now as I'm talking. And then ultimately it's going to support this NEPA document and permitting. So it's the National Environmental Policy Act. It's a whole permitting process that we have to go through to satisfy certain needs in association with the funding that we have for the project. One of those needs is the development of a purpose and need statement. And the purpose and need statement is something that is developed by the project team with input from various constituents to look at and basically judge the project. The future project has to be judged against the purpose and need statement. Are the alternatives that we're developing, are they supporting the purpose and need statement that has been developed? And so we have to look at the alternatives and take a look at the purpose and need statement, and if the alternatives don't satisfy the purpose and need statement, then they probably shouldn't be applied. So the definition of use, it's required for NEPA clearance, National Environmental Policy Act. That purpose and need statement defines transportation issues and needs, states the reason for the undertaking and the intended outcomes. It's used to compare effectiveness of the build alternatives against the no-build alternatives. So if you did nothing, how do your alternatives match against whether or not you're going to do nothing? So for this project, the purpose, and I'm going to read this because I think it's important. The purpose of the project is to address structural deficiencies, safety concerns, and conflicts between vehicle, bicycle, and pedestrians on Loudon Road. I can't read that there. In the municipal red list bridge, so it's a red listed bridge, I'm sure some of you know that, over the Merrimack River. That's the overall purpose of the project. The need is defined to address the following: structural deficiency of the deck. It's a bridge project, first and foremost. It needs a lot of work. Superstructure and abutment back wall deterioration. Second part, operational deficiencies caused by imbalanced lane groups and lane alignments through the I-93 exit 14 northbound interchange and Fort Eddy Road. You all know that there's issues at those intersections, so when you were looking at these maps here and these maps here, the project extends from Gully Hill Road, including Fort Eddy Road. So our job is to look at those intersections, how they operate, and are there improvements that we can make as part of this project that would not worsen the condition in that area and maybe make it a little bit better as we move forward. Lack of adequate shoulders for bicycle use. You know, if you've been out there, that it's pretty awful. The things that I've seen on that road, pretty scary. So you'll see with the options that have been put together, there's better accommodations for bicycles and pedestrians, sidewalks, shared use path, shoulders, basically to allow for improved safety, buffers to vehicles, and just better organization and safety for traveling public out there. Limited pedestrian crossings through the I-93 exit 14 across Loudon Road. So that's something that we're taking a look at as well. In association with that, we defined a series of goals and objectives, and all of these go into us evaluating each of the alternatives that we're studying as part of the project. Provide improved service life for Loudon Road Bridge over the Merrimack River. Address structural deterioration and removal from the municipal bridge red listing. One of the things that I've heard tonight from a number of people who were coming in was based on a report, I think, that was made that the entire bridge was being replaced. Not true. The project involves it's a deck rehabilitation or a deck replacement. That's what we're doing. So we're not necessarily just tearing up everything and putting it all back. We're going to really be working topside and reconstructing the deck of the bridge. So it's not a full replacement. Implement infrastructure improvements that will accommodate the city's long-term objectives for multimodal and recreational connections between Kiwanis Waterfront Park, Merrimack River Greenway Trail, and the Northern Rail Trail. These are all things that we heard during the engineering study that were vitally important to the community, and so really had to be incorporated into the project. That was one of the goals that we had as part of the project, was how can we accommodate these needs and make accessibility improvements as we move forward. And so that was a big consideration. You'll see that as we get into some of the alternatives that were reviewed in the engineering study back in 2022. Complement and accommodate improved operational flow and traffic safety. We're looking at operations at Fort Eddy Road. Some of that includes operations at exit 14. This is not the interchange project, so we're really focused on abutment to abutment and those two intersections and how we can make safety improvements there. Implement needed utility infrastructure improvements. One of the things that we've been working with Mike on is coordinating on the need for water line improvements, and there's another consultant that is working on that as well, and that's going to get integrated in this project as that design moves along. So that's all part of what goes into the bridge as well. There's utilities that are hung under the bridge, and all of the replacement of that water main that's in there and any other utility that's going to be impacted has to be properly supported during construction, maintained, and or replaced as improvements are needed. Last, minimize project impacts to local businesses as well as natural, cultural, and environmental resources. What we're really trying to do is keep a very tight footprint, even though we're looking at making some wider accommodations out there mainly for pedestrians and bicycles and safer accommodations for vehicles as well. We're trying to keep a very tight footprint in that so we're not having significant impacts to the right-of-way or the natural and cultural resources that are out there. So now I'm going to step you through the concepts that we've looked at. So some of this stems back to the study that was done early in 2020. So you're going to see some early concepts. I'm going to step you through a series of 5 concepts that were evaluated for the bridge and kind of tell you why. So 5 concepts I talked about, 1 through 5. One of them just included a deck replacement. That included 5-foot sidewalks on either side. This was basically to put back what's there today. So if you look at what's there today, we'd put it back, make some minor modifications, but it really wouldn't change over what's there today. Second alternative, again, looked at deck replacement, but looked at some widening of the sidewalks and the shoulders, adding a shoulder width instead of the 2-foot, where there's virtually no shoulder width out there today, adding some wider shoulders and wider sidewalks, and going a little bit wider. Alternative number 3 looked at one girder widening. So we looked at incremental modifications to the bridge to make it a little bit wider and make for better accommodations. Included a raised island in the middle as well. Went to 5 travel lanes or 5 lanes, 6-foot sidewalks and 5-foot shoulders. And then the alternative number 4 included 2 girders, and you kind of get the sense of what's happening here. And the last 2 alternatives that were looked at included shared use paths, and this is when we started looking at the accommodations of the Northern Rail Trail and the Greenway Trail, and how we could accommodate those connections for improved multimodal uses. So those are the last 2 alternatives. Concept 1, no bridge widening. This is kind of a nice cartoon figure that, that shows you what it looks like out there today. You have 2 lanes that are heading up to the Heights. You have 2 lanes that are heading into downtown. You have this right turn lane that goes into Fort Eddy Road. And in the middle is kind of like no man's land, where there's a gutter in there and it's painted, and that's where the drainage goes when it rains. So concept 1 would basically put that back, no bridge widening, except one of the, so this is the engineering version of that concept. Concept 1, no bridge widening, match existing, but we would make some improvements to the overall bridge typical section and eliminate the gutter in the middle. Put back the 5-foot sidewalks, maintain the lanes that are out there, a turn lane here, 2 through lanes each way. That's concept 1. No accommodations for connections to the Greenway Trail or any of those path connections or wider shoulders. Concept 2, you see lane reassignment only. What that did is it took this right turn lane into Fort Eddy Road and it combined it with the through lane here, because the demand really it wasn't shown to be there from the traffic volumes we were looking at. So combine that, and what did it do? It took that width from that right turn lane and redistributed it into 5-foot shoulders on either side and a 6-foot median in the middle. 6-foot sidewalks on either side. So that's concept 2. So, but no significant widening, no additional girders down here. So it basically takes the existing structure and builds on top of that. Concept 3, added a westbound auxiliary lane. What does that mean? This lane right here would become a dedicated turn lane that would ultimately go to the north, the southbound on-ramp for I-93. And as you know, sitting in traffic out there, a lot of that traffic queues up back past Gully Hill Road and causes significant issues, congestion issues in the PM condition especially. So this also combines the right turn lane to Fort Eddy Road, maintains these 2 through lanes which go into downtown, and then 2 lanes which go up to the Heights, 5-foot shoulders, 6-foot sidewalks, and one new girder on the outside, on the downstream side. Concept 4, similarly, if you follow how this is going, introduced a 12-foot shared use path on both sides. So we said, okay, what would it look like if we just put shared use paths on both sides of the road and widened out to accommodate that, as well as a new left turn lane, dedicated westbound auxiliary lane to the interstate. And that's what that would look like. Resulted in a significant widening, 97 feet. I forget what the overall widening was on that. 20 feet? Yeah, it says it right there, 20 feet. So that was concept 4. We'll look at the costs associated with that in a minute. That's the last thing that we looked at is, how does that reflect in the cost estimates? Concept 5 was the last one that we looked at. 16-foot bridge widening, still 2 girders, but it took a balanced approach to the shared use path concept and put a shared use path on the upstream side, maintained a 6-foot sidewalk on the downstream side, 5-foot shoulders on both sides, and added that auxiliary lane to I-93 southbound. This was seen to be a balanced condition, a balanced alternative that would provide that shared use path, bidirectional shared use path here, while still providing good mobility on the downstream side as well, and seeking to improve some of the operational issues at the interchange. So the recommended concept that came out of all of that after we were done with the study in 2020 looks something like this. The recommendation that was made to TPAC and City Council and what we brought to GASIT to support the additional funding that was ultimately provided for the project by DOT and programmed by the city resulted in this shared use path on the upstream side, sidewalk on the downstream side, the 5-foot shoulders, and then this auxiliary lane to I-93, 2 lanes into the city, 2 lanes to the Heights. And this is what was being moved forward as the preferred alternative, or the recommended concept. In plan view, that's what you see up here and here. Some of you were looking at this. This is what it looks like in plan view. Shows all of the lane widths here and what the geometry looks like, improvements to Fort Eddy Road. Just to explain the colors a little bit, if you're not getting that, yellow is new pavement. That would be new roadway pavement. This purple up here would be new sidewalks and walkways. Crosswalks you can see here, 2 signalized intersections as they are today. And then one of the things that we were also looking at was this path connection to the Merrimack River Greenway Trail. One thing I'm going to talk about here is this crossing right here. So this here, what you see, this bulb out here, is a concept that was put together for the possible connection to the MRGT. These are things that we're still working through in the final design. It's not solid yet, so we still need to work through all of the concept. We need to work through the environmental considerations, the permitting considerations. So this is something that we would like to have in the project, but from a cost and a permitting perspective, we're not quite sure yet. So hopefully when we come back and present the plan to you again, we'll have a better idea of what we can do and how much it's all going to cost. So we understand that there's a plan in front of the city right now for the redevelopment of the Everett Arena. Would actually work kind of nice with that, because when you look at that plan, it shows this path connection which connects up to this, which works well with the plan that we have in here. This is just another engineering project, another engineering view of this. Shows you the overall length of the project. Purple is the shared use path on the upstream side. Purple on this side is just the walkway, the sidewalk on that side. Green is the raised median, so today you have no raised median. Under this condition, you would have a raised median in the middle, providing for some better safety conditions out there. Signalized intersections. And then this sort of more yellow lane is really what reflects that auxiliary lane that would be the dedicated left that would pick up here and store all of these vehicles queuing up to go to the southbound on-ramp in the interchange here. This is just a blown-up view of that same intersection. So you can see that lane would come through here. Maintains 2 lefts out of Fort Eddy Road to clear that traffic, the right out of Fort Eddy Road, 2 rights coming off of the turnpike or off of the ramp, and you got 2 lefts into Fort Eddy Road here. We sought to kind of improve the geometry here coming through the intersection, because it's kind of a hook as you're going through that intersection today. And so with the bridge widening on either side, it allowed us to kind of soften that up a little bit and make it a little bit better condition as you're driving through there. This is the other side on Gully Hill Road. Again, shows the path, the terminal connection over here. And again, we're still working out the details of how or if that will actually connect to a path to make that MRGT connection. So when we looked at costs for each of these alternatives, that was one of the big things that we had to do as part of the study that was completed in 2020, and how we got to gas it for ultimate funding. The original funding that was programmed at the DOT level for just a pure deck replacement, just to put back what was there and make those improvements, was in the program at the time at $9.4 million. So when you go through all of the different alternatives that we studied and I just presented, you see the range of alternatives, including alternative 4, which had the shared use path on both sides at that $20 million. And then the alternative, or concept number 5, came down a bit at 18.6, and that reflects the shared use path on the upstream side. This was the preferred concept that was put in front of, again, TPAC, City Council, and GASSET. So as we go through all of this, there's still some things that we haven't worked out. We're not done with the design. The project's not complete yet. We still have a lot of work to do over the next couple of years to really get to a point where it's going to go to construction. So there's some other design considerations that we have to get through as we get through the project. I'm going to show you some of those. One, obviously, is the I-93 project, Bow to Concord. I know Jason's here tonight, and he's representing the department for that. What you can be assured of is that we're coordinating the design of this project to make sure that it will ultimately fit with what the department is going to do with the Exit 14 interchange. Construction of that is going to come later, so this project will be done and built first. So what we're going to be building is matching the existing condition out there today. So we kind of see it as an interim condition, but we're going to match what's out there today. So here's the limits of the project that we're presenting to you tonight, and this shows you the ultimate configuration of the F2, I think it's 2.2 alternative, for the I-93 Bow to Concord project. In the Bow to Concord project, ultimately, so we've coordinated this connection here for the ultimate MRGT connection coming across the bridge here, across here, across here. This design here, I think it accommodates a 12-foot shared use path, 10-foot shared use path under the interstate here, and ultimately is going to head up to form a connection with the Northern Rail Trail up off of Store Street. So this is one of the things that we're still working through as well, and this is kind of an exciting thing that is interesting as part of this project. When you look at this trail connection here that we've been talking about, the possibility of putting in, how does that help? The idea was to actually go underneath the bridge in this area so that folks who are coming up ultimately through this connection here, which is not built yet, which is why it's shown in red, it's the planned MRGT connection from the parking lot that has been constructed here, up Gully Hill Road, so what this seeks to do is actually provide an opportunity for people to get onto the path and head up into downtown and into the trail connection here without necessarily crossing over Loudon Road here. So you could potentially come this way, hit the path here, go underneath the bridge, make that trail connection, and then head off this way and head into downtown. What does that look like? It looks like this. So this is a rendering that we put together which kind of shows what that would look like with people. I think is it a 12-foot clearance? 10-foot clearance? 10-foot clearance from here to here allows for people on bikes and pedestrians to get under there. It would be protected here. One of the things that we have to consider, though, is what happens during flooding events. I think you're all down here enough. You know what happens when the river comes up. So when we look at flood elevations, you can see this might be the normal Q1.1, so a flooding event that occurs every year. Might be down here, and then a Q50, traditionally something that occurs every 50 years, although now it's more, would be up in this area. So you can see in the higher storm events, it's something that would be inundated, and that's something that would have to be planned for if it's going to move forward. Not unlike what happens today in the fields in this area, as it's the sunflower connection. So that would be under the same conditions. So if this floods, this would be flooded as well, and this would actually be flooded first. Right, Greg? Yep. Okay. So it should be nothing new. There's no new condition here, but just full disclosure, that's something that may have to be closed periodically depending on what happens with flooding events. And what happens then you still have this connection on the street side to be able to make this crossing here, so that there would still be a crosswalk here to be able to make that connection, but people on bikes would have to dismount and walk across. Okay. Bridge rail. So one of the things that we knew that we needed to cover after the engineering study was complete was what do the rail connections, what does the rail need to look like on the bridge? What do we want the bridge to look like? We haven't fully vetted that yet. These are still some of the details that we're looking at as part of the final design that we go through. But here's some examples of the things that we could build into this project, and these are some of the things that the design team is studying now. So we're looking at a positive concrete barrier, something that looks like this with a railing on top, and then a pedestrian railing on the back. This one's in Dover. This is the Scammell Bridge. I'm sure some of you recognize that. So this is the application, a similar application that we're looking to put onto this bridge here on that upstream side. Similarly, this is Connecticut River Crossing in Hanover. This is something that we could do here as well. This is different because it has a steel rail here and then a pedestrian rail on the back side. This one here is in Plymouth. Again, a concrete rail with a pedestrian rail on the back side. And then this is a slightly different application where you have a bar rail on the front side and then another different type of pedestrian rail on the back side. The requirements are, needs to be crash worthy on the inside, so if it gets hit, needs to keep it from people from going over. The inside rail has to be 42 inches high. That's this rail here. And then the outside rail needs to be 54 inches high, this over here. So these are some of the things that we're working through as we get through the design of this. So hopefully next time we come back, we'll be presenting what that actually looks like in design. But we wanted to get some precedent images out to you so that you could have an idea of what it's going to look like in the future. Almost done, promise. Program budget. So when we went to Gasset in 2022, Tony's here, we can speak. We were working a lot with him. We went to the estimate review committee at DOT. Ultimately the budget that we put together for the project at that time was put into the program. It was escalated, to ensure that there was going to be enough money over the course of years when this thing actually hits. And that's what's currently in the budget. So when you look at the state 10-year plan right now, this is what you would see. It's in the program at 24/7, just over $24 million. This shows construction in 2026. However, I'm going to show you a schedule in a minute that would show this going to construction in 2028. Next steps in schedule. So the next steps after tonight, we'll be looking to develop the preferred alternative, complete the preliminary design, get through the permitting or the NEPA process, the NEPA clearance. We're going to come back for a second public information meeting and present to you how far we've come, what we've done, what it looks like. And then ultimately we'll get into final design, complete that design, and then prepare bidding documents and go to construction. So what does that timeline look like? This is a little bit of history, but it shows you we started this back in June of 2020. The engineering study was completed in 2022. There was traffic data collection that was done by Debbie and her group in 2024. This is tonight, March 2025. So the preliminary design and the environmental study, we're hoping it's going to be done by the fall of 2025, and then we'd be looking to schedule another meeting like tonight to come back and make a presentation to you. Ultimately, final design efforts between summer and winter of 2026, bidding and construction 27 to 29. I see nodding heads. Okay. All right, Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you. That was a lot, and I know we went through it fast.
So before we get to questions and comments, I do want to recognize that the mayor is here tonight. There's at least one counselor. I don't know if there are other counselors here. A couple of counselors here tonight. So I just wanted to give the opportunity if any public officials or members of the administration wanted to make any comments before we get into questions. Any comments that folks want to make? All set? Okay. All right. So I will open it up for comments, and as we speak, let's speak into the microphone. This is being recorded so that folks can watch it later, and it'll be good to hear the actual questions, and then we'll pass that around. So,
hello. I guess it's a question, but it's going to start out as a comment, and that is why you didn't consider an alternative 6. And the alternative 6 I'm going to describe is you put the shared use path on the other side of the bridge, which would be the downstream side. And there are several good reasons for that. One of them is, if you look at where it goes now, it cuts across two of the busiest things. It cuts across both Fort Eddy Road and also the northbound on-ramp, whereas if you put it on the other side, it would only be cutting across an off-ramp, which is narrower. And the same thing, it's out of your part of the project, but when you get to the interchange project, once again, on the north side, it cuts across two important things, whereas on the south side, it isn't really as significant. So I see a big advantage on putting the shared use path on the south side instead. And yet another feature of this is possibly you could add 2 girders to the south side and none on the north side, which I think would be cheaper than messing with both ends of it, putting them both in the same place. And that would put the shared use path there. It would also serve to straighten out that intersection a little bit more. So if you can make that plan work, I think just in terms of what you're talking about, you'd have a much better system if you put it on the other side. And the last reason I want to do it, and once again, this is a concept that's, draws from a larger area, but the environmental people might think about it. And that is, you look at it right now, you have 3/4 of a loop trail from downtown around the Merrimack River, of going down one side by the Sunflowers and up the other side through Teardrop Park. There's one section missing, which if you put the bridge across I-93 that they're considering, and or you went along the river on top of the flood control wall they're considering, you would now have a loop path from downtown looping around the south side of this project. And if you ever were to do that, it would be a great advantage on having the shared use path on the south side so people could do this loop without crossing Loudon Road instead of having to cross it twice. So I guess that's a comment. The question is, have you ever considered something like that?
okay. All right. Sounds like we've got some structural questions in there, which I don't know if we want to try to answer that tonight. But we've probably also taken a look at this. I don't have all the history personally. I don't know if you want to speak to some of that. Yeah, I've got two. You can.
All right. I think we did spend some time looking at a southern connection, like you said. And I think some of the considerations were ultimately not really wanting to cross the exit 14 ramp. That was one. But ultimately, we knew that this ramp here is going to be going away as part of the state DOT project. So that one would go away. Now we know that that's still that right turn or the slip lane onto I-93 northbound is going to remain there. So this does become something that we need to get around if we're going to maintain that concept to get that. And ultimately, there needs to be a way to get from this side down to Store Street where it's ultimately going to connect to the Northern Rail Trail. I think one of the things that we looked at was the difficulties in actually getting to this point and actually making that connection to the other side. That's one thing. Widening on the south side like this, one of the considerations on the structural side that Nick could probably talk to is we're trying to find a balanced way to widen the bridge and provide the lanes up top and all of the accommodations for that. One of the things that we ended up doing as part of this project is having a balanced widening so we don't necessarily impact the piers going into the river. Doing what you're suggesting would result in significant widening of the piers on the lower end of this, which would make the construction costs go up a lot higher, as well as environmental impacts. Nick, do you want to add to that, or is that covered?
That pretty much covers it. To support the new girders that are coming up on either side.
Come on up. Yeah.
So to support the new girders that would potentially be on each side, we got to widen the piers at the top where those girders sit and are supported by those piers. But to limit the impacts in the river, we're actually going to reinforce the foundations that are there to not widen that footprint down in the river. So right now the piers are kind of pitched in towards the top, and through this project they'll kind of be pitched out, so we're limiting that footprint within the river. So that's why we didn't go two, because then you're into additional foundation work and more piles that are being driven into the river and a longer construction duration and more cost.
I appreciate your comments. We'll consider it. There was a lot of thought that went into the concept to date. Because of this, it affects cost.
Do we have other questions?
Will any of these new designs improve the traffic flow? That's what most of us care about. Very often when you're going from the Heights, trying to get to downtown, you get stuck on the bridge for 2 or 3 lights. On the left lanes, the right lanes seem to move. Will that be improved?
Short answer is yes. One of the things that we're looking at as part of the updated traffic data that we've collected is analyzing how that's going to function. Our goal is to not make it worse and make improvements where we can. One of the things that I presented here tonight is that left turn lane that goes to the interstate, that goes to the southbound on-ramp. That's a measure that would help to pull some of that left-turning traffic out of the traffic that is heading up to Concord Center and kind of cleaning up some of the traffic operations in that area and separating traffic so that it flows better and more efficiently. What we're looking at doing as we go in and continue to analyze the traffic and look at the growth of the traffic over the next few years is to make improvements and efficiencies at the Gully Hill Road intersection as well as Fort Eddy Road, but we're also looking at traffic timing up to Main Street as well to see if there's any improvements that can be made with the timing and phasing of those existing signals. And we'll be working with the city as that goes along too and see if there's flow improvements that we can make with the traffic and the signals all the way up the corridor.
Will you also be removing that spot where we have, when you're going straight down, that all of a sudden you have to veer right, and then all the cars on the right of you cut in front of you? Will that be improved?
Yes, it will. That was one of the purposes of introducing that left turn lane that I was talking about that goes to the interstate.
Because right now it's a hazard.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
We do have.
I've been on the receiving end of people cutting in on that, so.
Yeah, you know it's going to happen. You just have to watch out for it.
Sure.
Rock
Right.
alluded to it, but the city does have a coordinated signal system. Several of these traffic signals up through Loudon Road are coordinated together, and so we'll be taking a look at that.
Yep,
And,
that is part of the project, is looking at all of that.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Fundamental question. When I hear a bridge is red listed, I think of the state transportation commissioner who said his best advice was to drive fast and don't look back. So I'm mentally calculating how many times I've driven across that bridge in the past 10 years and the sense of urgency of with the construction still to come. And then related to that is, of course, the funding. And just to ask your sense of confidence that the lion's share of the funding coming from the federal government will come through in order to pay for the bridge properly.
Yeah, we have no indication right now that there is any issues with the funding for this bridge. It's a 80-20 split, 20% local, and then 80% is the state federal funding side of it. And yeah, right now we just don't have any indication that there are any issues with that. I know you're hearing a lot about different things going on with the federal government right now, but just from this standpoint, transportation, bridges, we just haven't heard anything that would lead us to believe that there's anything different that's going to change right now.
Hearing directly from the DOT, we think that there's not a lot of risk right now, but we don't know. On the infrastructure part, the red-listed bridge, one of the things that we did do as part of the early data collection phase is we collected information, got up under the bridge, took a look at it, and did a bridge assessment, to kind of figure out what was going on under there. And no, it's not going to fall apart. It's not going to fall down. You might see some of the improvements that came out of that. What's that? Don't drive fast. Don't drive fast. Some of the work that the city has actually done in response to that is you see that there was some paving that was done out there recently to get rid of some of the cracking and the potholes and the delamination of the pavement out there. And some of that's done to really protect the bridge deck underneath and make sure that that it's protected while we're under design on this thing. So Nick and his group on the bridge side spent quite a bit of time under that bridge assessing it, making sure that it's safe, and it's safe. So that condition assessment was provided to the DOT as well. We made that presentation to them, and that paving project came out of that. We'll continue to monitor it, during the design process.
I guess the burning question for me is what happens to the traffic during the construction?
Sure. So part of the design process that we have to go through is looking at traffic management during construction. So when we did the original study back in 2020, we took a look at construction bridge phasing. And this is what drives the timing and the cost of a lot of bridge projects like this, and that you have to accommodate traffic out there and make sure it's going to flow. I was talking to somebody earlier tonight about emergency response during that time, and that's some of the things that's going to have to be considered in the traffic management plan that gets put together, and that will be a requirement for the contractor that ultimately is going to build the bridge as well and make sure that they give priority to emergency response vehicles. But part of what we're going to be doing as part of final design is taking a look at how the bridge is phased in construction, how it can accommodate the traffic that's out there, how can it accommodate emergency response vehicles. Don't have all the details worked out right now. That is definitely something that's going to be considered.
I'll be back to you.
Hi. Yep. On one of the slides, I think I saw a footnote of a separate bike pedestrian bridge, and that didn't make it into any of your final designs. Can you explain, was it purely a cost reason, environmental? Why did that not make it in?
Boy, you had good eyes if you saw that. That was a note on the cost slide that we looked at. We looked at a separate pedestrian bridge on the upstream side and what the cost of that would be. Ultimately, it would likely result in additional environmental impacts because of the footings and the foundations that would be required in the river, as well as getting out on either side of that. There was about a $6 million price tag associated with that, but that was 4 years ago now, I think, when we put that estimate together. And when we looked at that versus the cost of the bridge that would have been built alongside of it at the same time, and you looked at the economics of that versus putting it on the new structure on the piers that Nick was talking about, where we're not doing work in the river, it just seemed to make sense from an economics and a constructability perspective to do that. Here you go. Good question.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. I'm High five. I applaud you for putting quite a bit of focus on the Merrimack River Greenway Trail on the Gully Road side, on the east side of the river, trying to go under the bridge. I was under the misimpression that there would be a new bridge, new girders, new undercarriage, so you could get additional height.
Right.
And make it easier to go underneath. But you've explained that's not the case. But if you can still do that, go under the bridge, I think it would be wonderful, because you don't want to have an at-grade crossing. And I've said this earlier on in other public hearings, the city's aware of this, but I've been adamant about you don't want to have an at-grade crossing either on the east side next to Gully Road or crossing over Fort Eddy. So, what do we have left? So underneath the bridge on the east side would be great, and that's probably doable 95% of the time, except during flooding. And then you would have an at-grade crossing, but during those few times, great. Now, once you go over, you've mentioned earlier you'd have a tunnel under the expanded I-93. I think that's great. So now is, how do you cross over Fort Eddy? Because of gradients and limitations that you're going to have with, disability, accessible for wheelchair folks, I would imagine it's going to be difficult to do, but whether you go over Fort Eddy or go under, whatever you do, as long as it's not an at-grade crossing, I think that really needs to be done. It's critical. If you think there's a lot of accidents there now, I think Merrimack River Greenway Trail over the years, when it's done, is going to draw in a lot of people, and it's going to increase pedestrian traffic significantly. So, have you met with the 93 engineers, McPherson?
I think most of that team is here tonight in the back.
So have you met with them already and trying to coordinate this? Because there is a lot of coordination required.
Yeah, we all know them pretty well. We've been meeting, with the city and the DOT, and McFarland Johnson works with the DOT on that project.
Yeah.
There's definitely a heightened interest in making sure the two projects meet in the middle.
Yeah.
One of the things I want to clarify, though, the proposed project that we're looking at does not include a tunnel underneath Fort Eddy Road. If that's what you understood, that's not.
However you cross it.
Yeah.
You're going to have, you show the purple. Show the purple going over Fort Eddy Road.
Right here.
Yes. So how are you going to do that?
That there would be an at-grade crossing, whether it's there or on the other side going across the ramp, there would be an at-grade crossing there.
Fine.
One of the things that we would have to do is we would have to look at, typical treatments that are dictated for shared use paths and crossing roadways like that. There would be a wider crosswalk application. We would have to make sure that it's safe. So it would be a little bit different than what you see there. That's one of the details that we have to work through as we go through this, and making sure that it's safe for a shared use path like that. There are design applications that we can put to that. Not ideal, but this is something that we're going to work with on this project.
That will delay traffic. It will back up traffic. You'll have to coordinate lighting accordingly.
Yep.
I believe, my own view, retired engineer, it's a mistake if you can't go over or under. And I think they both should be looked at.
Understand your concern. Traffic-wise, we'll be looking at traffic operations to make sure that traffic will flow through there in that condition. But thank you.
Great.
So you've done a good job explaining why we can't just have two girders on that south side and flip everything. And so we're going to have a girder on this side, north side, and girder on south side. Fine, we've got the width we need. Why can't we just take concept 5? We lift up the shared use that's over there on the left. We stick it over on the right. Everything else shifts left. Because I think having that shared use go on the south side makes a lot more sense to me. I've been along this corridor on my bike several times, and I'd rather be on that south side.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thanks for your comment. Any other comments, questions over here? Okay.
So what happens if the federal funding doesn't come through? Then what? What can still be done? I'm guessing it won't come.
Right now, there's no indication that the federal funding isn't going to be there. I think, we've been in communication with the department as well, which is where 80% of that funding is going to come from. And right now, that is in the 10-year plan. And, even with the current administration, there's a focus on, transportation and, goods and services. And, we're...
I think it should be noted that the design aspect of it is state funds. So the first part of this project is state funds worth of design. And we have no indication that the state is not going to pay for it. The second half is federal. If the federal funds aren't there for this project, it means they're not there for a lot of projects, so a lot of things are happening. We have no indication that that's the case. We're going forward. My boss is all the way up. Go forward with every project we have on the 10-year plan is intended to be built. That's the best we can say at this time. But
Thanks, Tony. If that happens, it wouldn't just be you that would be upset.
Well, once the project begins, what's the time frame from start to finish?
For construction,
Yeah,
2 years. 2 years.
okay. And
2 solid years.
Have you identified your staging areas yet? And if so, where are those?
We're working through that right now. I think that's part of what we need to look at through the final stages of design. Is a trestle going to be needed in the river? How is it going to get launched? Is it going to launch from the Everett Arena property, or is it going to launch from the other side? I think the property very well. I think you get a pretty good idea of where it may, where we may need to look at, to launch a trestle across the river. That's some of the stuff that we need to look at going forward as part of the final design. Don't have a final answer for that right now. Yes, sir.
Just a quick question, what's a BMP?
Thanks for asking that. I thought that as we put that on the plan, and we probably should have explained it. It's a best.
I'm sitting here trying to figure it out. I haven't gotten there.
I appreciate that. It's a best management practice. It's basically an acronym that speaks to a water quality treatment system, like a swale or a detention pond or something like that. Again, those are just concepts of where we're thinking that things might need to go to be able to deal with stormwater treatment before stuff goes into the Merrimack River. And again, we need to look at that from a final design perspective and see what works and what's feasible. But that's what we're eyeballing right now. Does that explain? Does that answer your question?
Just say it one more time.
Best management practice.
Yeah, thank you.
Stormwater quality treatment.
Okay, this has to do with the underpass. You said it was 10 feet. I mean, is there a federal regulation as to how high it has to be? Or if we assume there's not going to be any basketball players on high-wheeler bikes, could you make it 8 feet? And that way it wouldn't flood as often?
It's a design standard that's been applied. I mean, typically a 10-foot is pretty much a minimum clearance if you're going to have folks with bicycles going through there. There are higher standards if you expect to have horses on the trail. And, there's similar applications for other projects around the state as well. So 10-foot was selected as kind of the minimum that we would want to put there. And, that kind of dictates what kind of work we're going to do in front of the abutment there.
But my comment on this is they built a tunnel under Route 202 where one of the Cran State trails goes under it.
Yep.
And basically it's never used because in the wintertime it fills with ice and no one shovels it out. In the summertime, the mud is in there. So, a tunnel's a nice idea, but it's going to be, design it so it can be maintained or it won't be.
Understood. Thank you for that.
Appreciate the comment.
Can you just go back to the bicycle and pedestrian count slide? That was my only question.
Yeah. I don't know if you're going to be able to read those numbers.
Are those going to be available on the website?
Yes,
Okay.
we'll have the presentation available.
That was it. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. This will be posted.
Yeah, we'll
Okay.
have it posted.
With a new girder on each side, north and south, could you just quickly re-clarify about the existing piers? There are 2 piers there now.
Yep.
Will there be a new pier, or will the existing one simply be expanded on? That's one question. Second, has to do with construction. You said about timeline, about a 2-year schedule.
Correct.
So one way, perhaps, to cut it in half and tick everybody off in the city.
Close the bridge?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Close the bridge, 2 shifts a day, cost is going to come down dramatically, and give business the option of closing it off entirely, but for half the time and a much lower cost. I think it's something at least worthwhile to consider. 2 shifts.
Thank you. On the bridge pier, do you want to address that?
So right now, it's a 4-span bridge. There's actually 3 piers. There's one about at the light poles from if you're driving across on the top side. There's 3. So we're going to maintain the profile of the girders. So you look at the bridge from upstream or downstream, you can see the bottom chord has that nice arch appeal to it. We're going to mimic that with the new bridges, or with the new girders that are on either side, to kind of keep that aesthetic. The last thing we want to do is just go put in a solid plate girder with no character to it whatsoever. We want to kind of maintain the look of the bridge, even though we're widening it out from that standpoint. And then as far as the geometry of the piers, right now, they're kind of battered. They're wider at the bottom than they are at the top. And what we're proposing is all the pier concrete, we've sounded it, tested it, it's nice and solid, so we can tie into that through drilling and grouting and adding additional rebar and actually invert that the other way, so it's almost like the bow of a boat. So we're limiting our impact at the bottom of the piers, but maximizing our widening at the top to support those 2 girders, one on each side.
Kind of cantilever.
Yeah, more or less. Yeah, yeah. Kind of like a corbel kind of hanging off a building.
Thanks, Nick. Like the technical explanation.
You look at the Sewell Falls Bridge, they did that there.
Yeah. That really was a method, a way that we could really minimize the cost and minimize the work in the river. Thank you. Any more?
All right, you do have one, okay.
Mr. Backus.
Do you think there's any potential to have a parapet or some kind of a bump out on the sidewalk or on the path side so people can dwell and enjoy the river views?
Is that something that we looked at? I know we already have quite a bit of overhang on the girders that are there. There's going to be some of that's going to take place for overhead sign structure that's going to have to be probably about mid-span on the structure, as well as the lighting. That's hopefully we're going to come back with some of that when we present the final design. But I think there may be limitations on how far we can go with an overhang and something like that. Have we looked at that?
It's something we can look at, for sure. But with, we can take a look at that, but where the overhangs are now, they're 3'6", so they're not bad. But like Rock said, we'll have an overhead sign structure that we'll need to support as well. So that could definitely be something that we could take a look at doing. If the overhang does become a little too big for just the concrete to support it, we could look into, bracketing it with steel coming off the girder to help kind of support that there. So that's an option we could definitely consider.
It's only money.
I'm going to come behind you first, I'll come back to you.
You had talked a little bit about the style of the railings along the bridge. Has there been any thought to any other accoutrements? I won't say go as far as the giant balls on the Hanover Bridge, but something maybe a little friendlier looking as people cross that river.
You mean different than
Something
that?
aesthetic, something architectural.
Yeah, these are some of the concepts that we're actually considering. I don't know about the balls on the bridge.
I was there when they put them in.
Good for you. These are some of the design details that we haven't quite worked through yet, but we'll be considering options that look similar to this.
I'm going to go up to the board if I can. So I'm Dick Lemieux with the Merrimack River Greenway Trail, and we've been proceeding with the concept. The city is negotiating with the property owner at 6 Loudon Road for an easement across the parking lot. So our concept, and that easement should be signed by the end of this month. So our idea, the easement will come up around the backside of this parking lot and just stub off right here, right above the W. So I talked to Keith before the meeting. I'd like to say this out loud for all of you, but what we'd like to see is a connection to come down and connect with the trail here. The trail will be 12 feet wide and paved. In the parking lot, there'll be a 3-foot buffer on the parking side. We're also considering building a sidewalk to connect to here with the assumption that we'll be building this before you'll be building this. So we're raising money for this portion right now. This will be entirely funded by our nonprofit group. So let me say that one more time. We're raising money for this right now. We have flyers in the back with QR codes so you can donate. But anyway, we wanted to make that pitch that we need to work together so that these trails connect and they connect well.
Thank you for that, Dick.
Otherwise, my only disappointment is in the pushing off of the construction time. So last we knew it was 2026, 2027. Now it's 2027, 2029. Yeah. 2 years. So obviously, we'd like to see it sooner rather than later.
My last comment, I promise. On the
We're here all night.
on the bridge railings that you had up on a slide.
Sure.
My own personal view is the Dover one, but for any of them, have you thought of teenagers?
Think
So-
about teenagers every day.
Well, what a perfect place to jump and have a great time off the bridge. So if you were to do something like a tall gated fence that arches over kind of like that to prevent them from climbing up, it would really diminish the attractiveness of it, but from a safety perspective, I'd rather not see it, but if I was 16, I'd be going off that bridge.
I understand. Thank you for that.
Are there any other comments, questions? Thank you very much for all of your input. Appreciate your attendance and the input. And like Rock said, we'll be back. Right now, tentatively fall, but you'll see the announcement for that. But we do intend to be back for a follow-on public information meeting. So,
Thank you all for being here. We have a lot of work to do. Good night. Go home. Be safe.